Hello to each one of you. Unfortunately, I couldn't be with you in Abidjan in person because I'm attending the Africa Forward Summit in Nairobi as part of the French presidential delegation. Over the past years, we've seen how the topic of digital public infrastructure, especially as it relates to digital identity, has scaled up and has taken momentum across many countries across the world. However, there still remains an important question, which is the challenge of how you do that right and how you scale. Today, we're really excited to share with you the insights from our latest white paper that precisely seeks to answer that question. What characterizes, what really makes the leaders in this space stand out? What we've learned will surprise you. We've seen that about 1 country out of 3 in the world has reached leader status. Interestingly, about 15% of those are from Africa. We've also seen that while technology is important, technology alone is not enough. We've learned that wealth is only moderately related to the status of being a leader in the field. We see that digital ID systems built at scale happen when governments go beyond a system, when they actually entrench the ID system into the fabric of the economy. Now, looking at Africa, the story is really not single. In fact, the continent is a land of contrast, home to some very innovative, amongst the leading innovative services in the space. But also, 42% of the countries in the nascent segment come from the Africa region. And I'd like to leave you with one message. It is that the digital destiny of nations is by no means predetermined. And on the contrary, in the opportunity for digital identity systems at scale that we see ahead of us, Africa has an opportunity to take its fair share. I will now hand over to Olivier Charlane. Olivier is Executive VP for Africa and the Middle East with ION Group, to share with you in more details our findings. I hope you find them insightful. I hope they lay a foundation for your work in the various sessions. I wish you an excellent continuation of ID for Africa, and I look forward to seeing you in person again next year. Thank you very much and have a great meeting.
Okay, so thank you very much, Agnès, Mrs. Diallo. So my name is Seyni Manan Fati, Senior Technical Advisor to the Minister of Finance in Senegal, and also Ambassador for Senegal at ID for Africa. So I want to really welcome you today, this morning, for this session on achieving a population scale initial identity. Today, across Africa, many countries have successfully launched digital identity initiatives. Okay, the real challenge today is no longer pilot project; it is scale. And the question that we need to ask ourselves is how do we move from fragmented initiative to transnational infrastructure? How do we build systems that are interoperable, financially sustainable, secure, and capable of delivering real economic and social value? This discussion today that we will have is particularly important because digital identity is increasingly becoming the foundation of digital public infrastructure, enabling payments, public services, financial inclusion, taxation, social protection, and trusted digital ecosystem. As African governments accelerate their digital transformation agenda, the question is no longer whether digital identity matters. The real question today is how do we make it work at population scale? Today we are fortunate to have outstanding experts with me and practitioners with us to discuss these issues from both strategic and operational perspectives. Si je le dis en français, aujourd'hui la question n'est plus comment faire une carte d'identité. La question c'est comment faire passer l'identité numérique d'un projet pilote à une infrastructure nationale durable créant de la valeur économique et publique. Je vais donc passer la parole à mon premier expert, qui est Olivier Charlan, qui est vice-président, exécutif vice-président AIN Group et qui s'occupe de l'Asie, du Moyen-Orient et de l'Afrique et qui va nous faire une présentation. Vous avez 20 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Seni, for the introduction. Digital identity is becoming one of the most defining infrastructure of the 21st century. But when I say digital identity, it's not digital identity as a credential. I'm not talking of any kind of mobile ID. It's not digital identity as an IT project, sourcing a system. It's really digital ID as a national infrastructure for a state, for a country, and for its citizens, which brings some things, which bring value to the citizen and to the state. At AIN Group, we wanted to understand one simple but key question. Why do some countries achieve scale, and why some others are struggling to move beyond the deployment? And to answer this question, we have analyzed a set of data representing 210 countries, trying to understand if there are any kind of patterns within these data. And I'm glad to be here today with you to present you the outcome of this survey. What are the insights? What are the key learnings of this survey? For decades, countries have invested in roads, in ports, in telecom infrastructure, in electricity grids. But today, the countries are mainly investing in a new layer of infrastructure, which is called the digital public infrastructure. But at the center of this digital public infrastructure sits the digital identity scheme. And why is it so important? Why is it at the center of any kind of DPI? Because without a digital identity scheme, a trusted digital identity scheme, you cannot secure the payments, you cannot personalize the services to the citizens, and even data cannot be exchanged safely. So digital identity is the foundation of any kind of DPI. The question is not, is it worth it? I hope that we are all here today in this room convinced that yes, it is worth it, that yes, the potential is there. Why? We talk about reduced fraud, social and financial inclusion, better public services, which ultimately results in an acceleration of the economy. So the question is not, is it worth it? The question, again, is what makes a difference between different types of countries? When it comes to the impact, we know a lot of countries. I could name India, Nigeria, Estonia, Denmark in Europe, who have demonstrated tangible economic impact. And we are not talking of small numbers. We are talking of several percent of GDP. These are massive numbers. Again, as a reminder, if I just refer to India, the savings resulting from the deployment of their own DPI scheme has resulted in savings in the range of 10 billion euros a year. In Nigeria, when they have started to link the banking system with a digital ID scheme, it has resulted in a reduction of fraud of more than 50%. If I consider Brazil, in Brazil, the deployment of the PIX payments scheme has onboarded 40 million new citizens in the financial scheme. See the impact in terms of financial inclusion. So yes, it's worth it. The impact is there. There is no doubt about it. Again, the question is what makes the difference between successful countries and countries which are facing difficulties in the deployment. What separates these different countries was a key question we tried to answer. And to answer this key question, we have analyzed one of the most comprehensive set of data available on DPI. 210 countries, across 17 variables, spanning over 4 main dimensions. Obviously, the technology, the governance, the legal framework, and the ecosystem adoption, the link with the different stakeholders. And there is one first key learning out of this survey, which is that the maturity of the digital ID scheme is not binary. It's not good or bad, 0 or 1. It's not, there is no starting point and then a kind of end game. What we have seen is that basically we can identify 4 types for profiles of countries. We can cluster these 210 countries across 4 different profiles. What are these profiles? First, the nascent countries. These countries, they are building the foundations. They are starting the journey. They are trying to build a civil registration, which will be used as a feeder system. They are starting to put in place a governance. So they are just starting the journey. At the second level of maturity, we see 2 different types of profile. On one end, we have what we call the tech-focused countries. On the other end, we have the regulatory-driven countries. For the tech-focused countries, what does that mean? It means that some countries have deployed a solution, a system. It might be working, by the way. It might provide authentication services to the citizen. Does that mean that the country is meeting success? Not necessarily. Why? Because is there a governance? Is there a legal framework? And above all, is there any kind of ecosystem adoption? On the other hand, for the regulatory-driven countries, governance is there, the legal framework is available, but again, what about the ecosystem adoption? Because it needs to resonate for the citizens. It needs to prove a concrete day-to-day benefit for the citizen. And then comes the 4th category, the leaders. The leaders, basically, they are ticking all the dimensions: technology, governance in place, legal framework, and ecosystem adoption. One of the key learnings here is that technology is not enough. And this is the reason why, the digital ID journey is not about procuring a system. It goes far beyond deploying any kind of IT solution. It takes more than that. When we look at the global outcome of the survey, looking at the countries now, out of the 210 countries, we have identified 69 countries which have reached the leader status. 69, which makes basically 1/3. It's not that much. It's not too small, but it's not that much. Out of these 69 countries, 62% of them are in Europe. It's not necessarily a big surprise that Europe is the most mature continent when it comes to the digital maturity. Having said that, what is most fascinating to me is Africa. And why? Because Africa combines 2 different things. On one hand, we have identified several countries which have reached the leader status, which demonstrate that success can be achieved, which demonstrate what we call the famous leapfrog effect, along this digital ID journey. But on the other hand, close to 50% of the countries in Africa are still starting the journey, building the foundations. One key insight as well from this survey: the national income of a country does not determine success. It's something which is especially important for African countries. No country is cursed. No country, is doomed for failure. There is no direct link between the GDP of the country and the success. It shows that at a moment in time, the investments which are required can be supported by some countries, and then we generate digital ID schemes which are self-sustainable. So it's not only a matter of GDP or national income. Zooming in now on Africa, as I said, 7 countries in Africa have reached the leader status. And it's extremely promising for the other countries, the remaining 50%, which are just starting the journey. Why? because it demonstrates that when these countries, they are not constrained by decades of legacy system, they can make a fresh start, designing an architecture taking into account mobile-first principle, digital-first, privacy, security, interoperability, and above all, obviously, sovereignty. There is no legacy. So we take a fresh start. I would like to give you 3 different examples across Africa. If I start with Rwanda. Rwanda is especially interesting because this country has made a deliberate choice, a deliberate decision, which is to start with digital, issuing a unique digital ID number to its citizen, backed with authentication services, typically a mobile application, and only then to start considering a physical credential. There was a comment made earlier today saying, do we build digital ID on top of physical ID? Yes, no. Of course, yes, it works. But it's not a requirement. It's not a prerequisite. We can do the other way around, starting with a digital ID unique identifier, starting to provide services, concrete services to the citizen, and then issue the physical credential, which leverage the digital ID. Madagascar. In Madagascar, we have started to deploy a full end-to-end ID management system with a verification platform. And what is interesting is that we have made it a prerequisite to link the verification platform to the existing civil registration system. Again, one of the major first steps is the feeder system, the source of trust. How do we ensure that somewhere there is a repository of trust? So this is exactly what is being done today in Madagascar. We complete the ID management system backed with a civil registration. Third example, Kenya. Kenya, again, is a bit different. There is not only one way, and this is something which you will see at the conclusion of the presentation. Kenya is issuing e-ID cards for quite some time. But what is interesting is that we have embedded in the ID cards everything which will allow for future digital ID deployment. So in this case, the physical ID card can be used as a foundation for the digital ID deployment. Different ways, 3 different examples, but the key learning, there is no, big bang effect. It takes time. It does not happen all of a sudden. There is not one single way. It does, again, it's a long journey. It takes years for all these countries, including the leaders. It takes time, and it requires anticipation. These 3 examples, what they demonstrate is that at a moment in time, there is a vision. We know where we are going, we know how we are going there, and we know, the different stages which we have to pass at a moment in time. 3 key learnings from the leaders. The first one, technology, governance, obviously are important, obviously, but they are not enough. One of the key game changers is the ecosystem adoption. How do we embark, the private sectors, the bank, telco? How do we onboard public entities, healthcare, education? We need to create an ecosystem so that at the end it makes a difference for the citizens. It brings value on a day-to-day basis to the citizens. So the ecosystem is key. Again, deploying a digital ID scheme is not a matter of procurement of an IT system. It goes far beyond the pure technological part. The second key learning, and this is something I referred to earlier, the national income of a country does not determine success. There is no direct relationship between the success, of the leaders, successful countries, and ultimately the GDP of a country. The third one, the trust. Obviously, technology, governance, legal framework, ecosystem are key. But at a moment in time, when we get to the citizen, to onboard the citizens at the end of the day, it's not only the outcome of a communication campaign. It's not only marketing. You need to give trust to the citizen. And this trust has to be architected. It has to be sought. What does it mean? You need to have a clear governance. You need to have a clear, legal framework. especially about the data. How the data are being protected. And last but not least, you need to have redress mechanism. If something goes wrong, the citizen need to have the capacity to ask for a fix, for a solution, for things to be corrected. And this is only when we get the trust of the citizen, and then the usage at scale. One concrete example, Denmark. I understand that Denmark, obviously, is quite far from Africa. It's not a surprise. What is interesting about Denmark, it's not, the technology, it's not the adoption, even though when you look at the numbers are super impressive. We are talking of close to 100% adoption by the citizen in Denmark. But it's not my point here. The point is the business model. It was one of the questions earlier today during one of the presentations. How do we make it self-sustainable? Because we all know, we shall not be naive. At a moment in time, the government, the state, can start and put some fuel in the engine. But if it relies on public funds over years and over years, it's unlikely to be sustainable. How do we do so? What Denmark has done was to establish a relationship between the service providers, typically the private sector or the public entities, the one who are consuming the digital ID services, with what we call brokers. And these brokers, what are they doing? They are making the interface, they are sparing the burden of everything which is difficult, the technicalities, the security, the certification, and so forth, between the central platform and the consumers, the service providers. And as such, it creates two things. It creates scale, because it makes things so much easier for the consumer, private sector, public entities, and ultimately, obviously, the citizen. And it creates value. Because obviously, the trusted transactions are monetized. Not by the citizens, by the way. The citizen is not paying. The parties which are paying are the service providers. And why are they paying? Because it's much more efficient than when they would deploy on their own. Scale is there, trust is there, it's backed by the state, it increases efficiency. And this is why they are willing to pay a bit for each and every transaction. And then it flows into the ecosystem and it feeds the digital ID scheme. This is especially important for the 50% of the African countries which are starting the journey. At a moment in time, there are schemes to avoid, asking for public funds over years and years and years. Obviously, at start, you need to put fuel in the engine, but there are means to make a digital ID scheme self-sustainable.
Olivier, je te laisse 2 minutes.
And it is my last slide. To conclude, if there is one takeaway from this presentation, what is it? The digital ID maturity, it's not one single staircase. It's not we are starting there at the bottom and we are walking, up to the staircase. It's not how it works. Some countries are starting with technology, and then they need to put in place the right governance, the legal framework to embark the different stakeholders. Some others are starting with the governance. Ultimately, what is key for the success? Political commitment. Political commitment, it was one of the comments made earlier today, to go beyond the political cycle, beyond the funding cycle. Political commitment is key. Governance, someone needs to be in charge, an agency. Technology, obviously, and the ecosystem adoption. And once we combine the different dimensions, then we can create value which feeds the system. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Olivier, pour la présentation. Je vais te laisser venir t'asseoir. Tu peux venir t'asseoir. Je suis gentil. OK, donc, merci beaucoup. Donc, je vais mixer les questions en français et en anglais. Et je vais commencer par moi-même. Donc, je viens du Sénégal et donc, nous, on est dans une phase où on doit faire un choix de gouvernance et un choix de technologie. Donc, aujourd'hui, Olivier, de nombreux pays ont réussi à lancer des projets d'identité numérique, mais leur pérennisation financière et institutionnelle reste un défi majeur. D'accord ? Et selon votre expérience ou celle de votre compagnie, qu'est-ce qui différencie les systèmes d'identités qui deviennent de véritables infrastructures nationales, de ceux qui restent à l'état de projets pilotes et puis qui dépendent des bailleurs. D'accord? Et dans cette même logique, quel rôle joue l'intégration avec les paiements, la fiscalité ou les services publics dans la durabilité de ces systèmes?
Il y a plusieurs questions là. Oui. No, sorry. I've been said
in English.
In English. Okay, thank you. I see two prerequisites for moving from, let's say, the deployment of a solution and a real large-scale adoption. The first one is the ecosystem. If you want to make an impact to the citizens, you need to have parties, private sector, public entities. So typically banking sector, telco, healthcare, education are the big ones. The second one is the trust of the citizens. This is something I referred to in the presentation. We might come with the best solution, governance, legal framework, and so forth. The citizen needs to understand that there is no risk to use the system. Data are being protected. If something goes wrong, there are redress mechanisms. So these are the two main conditions, in my opinion. And to answer the last part of your question, when it comes to the financial sustainability of the model, I'm not too sure that there is one single answer to this question. Having said that, what we have seen ourselves, typically in Denmark, because we have been deploying the platform in Denmark for 15 years, I tend to believe personally that asking the citizen to pay is not the right thing. Because at a moment in time, again, if we want to create an acceleration, if we start asking citizens to pay, it's unlikely that even though there is added value, we say, it's costly. So we should take the money where it's from, where we have savings, gain in efficiency, banks, telcos, public entities, and then they can finance the system. It's not big money we are talking. When you are by transaction, it might be just a few cents, but they see the savings, and then we start scaling.
Merci beaucoup. So now I will ask some questions from the floor. So the first one, so I'm going back to technical question. Why are constant electronic signature and data exchange missing from your DPI model?
I admit I'm not too sure whether signature was part of the 17 variables, but the methodology is being detailed in the white paper which has been published. So I encourage, I don't know who has the question, but to check. If it was the case, it means that it has been taken into account in the whole methodology and the whole survey. If it was not the case, I confess that I don't have the answer. The data set which has been used has been published by the University and College of London. In such case, maybe if we look at the core of the data, there is an answer to this question, the signature itself.
Okay. Second one, why are Rwanda, Madagascar, and Kenya not following high insurance requirement? Does that not weaken trust?
Sorry, not following which requirement?
Why are Rwanda, Madagascar, and Kenya not following high assurance requirements?
Because they are, they are not at the beginning of the journey. They are already well advanced on the journey, significantly advanced on the journey. Having said that, as I was saying, it's not a matter of a beginning of an end. There is not one defined path. We tick this box and we move to the next one. So clearly, there is one thing which is for sure is that they are starting to combine all the different prerequisites so as to provide high level of insurance to their citizens in the short to mid-term.
Okay, so I will ask you the last question, otherwise they will clap at me. So if you should give advice to an African country on how to manage the leadership path, which one would it be? Okay, and what is the biggest mistake that government make?
I would answer twofold. First, political commitment. And again, it was one of the comments made earlier today. When we engage into a political cycle, which very often is linked to the funding cycle, if after 3, 4, 5 years, someone comes and say, you know what, I stop, I just shut down the governance body and so forth, obviously it's not going to materialize. The best, I was thinking Denmark. It took 20 years to Denmark. It does not come in 2 years. So political commitment, at a moment in time, it goes beyond the politics. And the second one, it should not be considered as a procurement exercise. It's not, I'm going to write the specs, I'm going to issue an RFP, I'm going to make technical ranking, price, and so forth. It's not what is at stake. Obviously, at a moment in time, it's part of the journey. But, it's just a small piece.
Thank you very much, Olivier, and I wanted to give him a round of applause.
Thank you.
And now I will go to my second expert today from Ghana, Moses Junior Biden. He's the CEO of Margins ID Group and has been deeply involved in large-scale identity deployment across Africa.
Well, it's afternoon now. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Screen's off. This afternoon, I'm here to speak about interoperability, and the case study is Ghana. A national ID system is only as good as the interoperability it has across sectors and how useful it is in a citizen's life, both in public services and private services. And Ghana is the use case I'm going to present today. Now, according to the World Bank, the OECD, and UNECA, as of 2024, there are 170 countries with varying degrees of national ID systems, and 85% of these are in Africa. Interestingly, only 15 to 20% of them will be considered to be sort of fully integrated. And some of the examples that are stated are normally either European or Asian ones: Estonia, India, Singapore, UAE. But Ghana is also very well integrated and must be cited amongst those use cases. So I'm just here to do that. Now, why is it important to have full interoperability and integration in the national ID system as the most important step for utility that gives citizens the benefit of e-government services, e-commerce services, financial technology services, digital banking, total social and financial inclusion? It's because the traditional national ID systems, not just in Ghana, but globally, is mostly fragmented, which means that in the old times, people collect data in different silos. These data structures are different, which means they have different data fields. The quality of the information in the data are different, and sometimes the identities are duplicated. Now, as we enter the digital age, we know that all countries that do not have their citizens having a digital avatar of themselves to interact with the digital world will have a negative impact on their social, economic, and political advancement. And that digital avatar or identity, if it can be faked or it can be stolen, then brings even bigger negative impacts. Fraud, corruption, and a lack of services efficiently and effectively delivered becomes the result of these fragmented and weak systems without a strong legal identity database. And who pays for it? Citizens pay for it. Citizens pay for it with inefficient services, ineffective services, paying 3 or 4 times the price that they should pay through bribery, corruption, etc., because of the human interface. In the public services, e-commerce is slowed down, the digital revolution is not accelerated, and financial services still largely remain out of the reach of normal people. So the common approach of having standalone programs, fragmented governance, and interoperability as a retrofit, rather from ab initio being one of design, creates problems that become very difficult to fix. In Africa, luckily, we don't have too many legacy systems. So we can leapfrog all these problems into the new digital world using new tools to solve modern problems that fit our social, economic, and political framework. The persistence of identity silos of the old can be leapfrogged, and we can go straight into an electronic and digital ID system that is fit for today's modern digital ecosystem. What does that mean? It means that right from inception, from design, we need to look at objectives from day one to see what sort of outcomes do we want, what sorts of objectives do we have, and what are our priorities in terms of our socio-economic and political priorities, so that we can gradually integrate and interrupt according to our needs and the highest impact. And even though people apply technology to this normally, it actually starts from a legal framework. There are questions about what's the role of governance and compliance and law. Because after all, who are you is determined by the constitution of countries, whether they run a constitution that's based on your citizenship by birth or by blood. Now, the definition of who you are legally is important as a foundation to build the digital identity that reflects your legal identity and therefore gives you your rights and privileges. And also takes from you your duties and obligations as you must perform by law. So design from the beginning is based on legal framework. It's also based on how you are organized. We don't live in a vacuum. What environment are you in? How do citizens interact? How do they actually get their services on the ground? Designing outside the legal framework and designing outside the operational and organizational framework of a country misaligns the technology that we apply to solve the problem. All these must be integrated in order to be successful. One trusted legal identity built upon by the best technology to ensure that the person exists only once in the fundamental database, and that we have all the fields of identity that they need, both in the public sector and in the private sector. So at the point of enrollment, we meet the person once, and we take all the information that we need at once, which cuts the cost of taking information, finding people, then trying to give them cards, which then brings the weaknesses in identity systems. So by design, one trusted identity with one credential, that is the spring from which all other identities flow from, is critical. Now, on the Ghana card, apart from the central database that collects all this data that all other institutions rely on, both public and private, we also have a physical card, which has 3 profiles and also has 14 applications, which can be shared with institutions, both public and private, and can be enabled according to their priorities. This gives us multiple verification options. Because in Africa, we just are not living in the future of, leapfrogging legacy systems. We're also thinking of how we innovate in the environment that we're in. So the use cases are applicable in all cases. So that an ID is not just a technology wand that we wave, but it's a living thing that actually impacts social and economic and political action. Now, the statutory authorities, the data governance rules, and who can access rights, it's a question of law, really. So by design, public institutions which have been empowered by their parliaments to receive a certain set of laws legally in order to be able to discharge their obligations should receive this data from a technical system when a citizen interacts with it. A citizen must give us consent if we can confirm that he's the person who he claims he is, exists once in the database, and can confirm this with the biometrics, going through a language detection text, that is AI and quantum proof as it evolves. This legal framework will determine whether what is done is lawful or not, and not to do it backwards. The quality of the systems that we want to interop with must also be coherent semantically, which simply means that the data flowing from system to system must be standardized, so that you don't have to worry about whether the data fits the standards that you need. All players in the public and private sector are working on the same standards. So data will flow automatically and will be controlled legally. Where an act of parliament or an enabling law does not allow a body, an organization, or a company to have certain data, then we must design into it consent by design. So data protection and consent, and citizens give their data at the point of access must be traceable. We must be able to tell that Moses Baden student here in Abidjan has been able to authenticate a transaction in Ghana, and I'm who I claim, and I'm transmitting exactly the data and information that I need, as happens in Ghana now. It's also important to understand how the legal framework synthesizes the role of organizations as they integrate with each other, so there are not too much conflict. So it's important to look at the laws and iron out the conflicts and the turf wars, so that there are defined roles, there's accountability structures, there's transparency, there's compliance by design, and this is mostly digital, without human intervention, and that we can report digitally and be sure that we're meeting our SLAs, we're meeting our legal framework and our legal compliance requirements digitally. So that also must be by design. Now, when it comes to technical, the technical must always follow, like I said, the law, the use case, and the business case. Unlike European countries or non-American countries, or even I say Asian, in Africa, we do not have sometimes the fundamental documents that we need to establish legal identity. So we must find other creative ways that are equally effective, whether it's a fracture in the birth system or the death system. We do not need, in all times, a physical card or digital ID. Even when the card is not present, through API, we must be able to authenticate biometrically, whether we're in person or remotely. We must also be able to make sure that the infrastructure is secure and it meets international standards, and it cannot be hacked. We must also make sure that systems are integrated both on the public and the private side. I'm doing this seamlessly. And whether there's a network, there's not a network, or whether the card is present or not present. So, why are PPPs now the buzzword? I think that from decades of implementing ID systems, it's become obvious, especially in Africa, that there's always a stop-start approach. And people start programs, and for whatever reason, in the middle, it stops, or the new vendors come, it's redone. We just keep repeating the investment, and most of them are not successful. So the main reason for that is what the public-private partnership answers. Because it's a question of risk allocation. Governments are good at doing some things and not so good at doing some things. Private sector is basically driven by profits, efficiency, and effectiveness, and sometimes there's an overreach. So by allocating risk properly and understanding how to mitigate the risk in reality, not in theory, you're able to have a balance between public and private. So for the government side, statutory authorities are interested in setting the citizenship law, making sure that people are legally who they claim they are, and that's a process to qualify that legal identity, and that can be proven in a digital process that is safeguarded and is risk mitigated in order not to allow unqualified people into the register. The setting of policy, the setting of standards, the setting of data protection rules, and especially for African countries, increasingly the importance of sovereignty over data and control of our data. The current situation where we have now wars, and we have in Europe being worried about using American digital platforms because of the risk that they pose in terms of risk and business continuity. It's a question that we must ponder. How do we design sovereignty by design? So that even though we use the private sector actors and vendors, the state remains in control and is able to ensure that if there's any fracture or any political risk or international risk, like COVID or war or whatever, we're able to operate and safeguard the benefits of our citizens. Sovereignty is important, so no private sector actor should own the government's database. Private sector should facilitate a robust, fundamental, secure national database for a state, but the state must control sovereignty. How do we design that into contracting? How do we safeguard that with SLAs and KPIs? How do we make that verifiable and reporting and compliance? These are important questions. Now in Ghana, the Margins ID Group conceptualized, designed, built, financed, and is cooperated, I think one of the most innovative public-private partnerships, even though we say it ourselves, over the last 14 years. And our role, of course, is to build all the subsystems integrated and to ensure that instead of treating this as an event or the sale of a system, that this is looked at as an output-based service, measured in SLAs, uptimes, and KPIs that are clear to all parties. That the private sector takes the technical risk, the operational risk, the efficiency risk, and the financing risk, so that it's not a sale of a system and then a blame game after as to what is working. And then the risk of the public sector is managed by the public sector. So payment is based on performance. And as you know in business, when payment is based on performance, most of these things work. So that's why it's been working in Ghana for 14 years. So most people ask, so how do we sustain this public-private partnership? Because if it's not an event, and it's a long-term contract, like in Ghana where we have a 15-year PPP, that means that it's not just building the system, it's also maintaining it, it's also evolving it, it's also updating it, it's also bringing in new innovation, it's also about threat mitigation. As we have AI breaking code, as we have quantum computing breaking cryptography, who is going to make sure that we keep up to the standards? Is it going to be the government? Obviously not. The government is not the best placed person to invest in innovation. The private sector is efficient, it's profit-driven, it's effective, and it wants to make sure that it's earning revenue over the long term. It seems that the private sector is the best party to do that if you can keep the risk of data protection and so on from it. So the private sector does that. But it must do that and have a sustainable revenue model to be paid for. So that comes from transaction fees. These transaction fees are from players who actually need to use the system and find the fees affordable rather than they building the systems up themselves. So that private investment gets a return and there's a revenue share with the government based on an objective negotiation and a sustainable model that will stand the test of time. So interoperability generally has to reduce risk of exposure of identity theft and exposing citizens' data to people that shouldn't have them. So there should be clear legal basis, sovereign oversight, access control, legally controlled digitally, and data protection by design, and cybersecurity and monitoring on a constant evolving database to ensure that we don't have any breakings and we don't have data theft. Audit and accountability is digital, is daily, is without human interference, and is designed to follow the output that's been agreed between the parties. Now, these are the numbers. In Ghana, we use an innovative, decentralized instant issuance process. Instant issuance because you know that it costs twice to give the guy an ID and then to go and find him to deliver it. So that system is digitized to ensure that most people receive their cards instantly and go through all the process within 30 minutes. And 85% of the parties received their card in the first year, and we registered more than 15.7 million people in year one. Today, we are 19.3 million cards have been delivered to the adult population, 92% of them. And the only 100,000 was because there was a break for COVID, and therefore the instant issuance couldn't cover that gap. That's a very important number. We've been doing this for 35 years, and since 2019, we progressively rolled out, and we've connected over 262 institutions. At the height of the registration, we're doing 250,000 instant issuance registration, including legal identity tests and so on, in one day. So,
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Interoperability is taking the data sets, whether it's for national health insurance, claims identification, reduced cost. Tax numbers are now 19.2 million, they used to be 2.5. SIM registration ensures that identity and payments and communications are integrated in real time. Registering for vehicle or driver's license does not require you to fill new information. Your data flows straight from national ID on a biometric verification, either in person or remotely. Banking and finance, mobile money, since we started in 2019, has gone from 150 billion to 450 billion today. Today, e-passport services at the airport is connected to national ID, so you can come in and out, and if you are wanted internationally or locally, it's flagged automatically. Interoperability brings significant economic, social, and political advantage if we understand what we're doing and the environment that we're doing it in. So, API models, EID philosophy, card not present with direct biometrification, card presence, no communication, integration with digital signatures and verification, covers all the use cases that African countries use, and we've proven it. Today, we're migrating the electronic ID element on the card onto the phone, which is just another secure element. A card is a computer without a battery, a screen, or a keypad. A phone is a card with a keypad, a battery, and a screen. They are interoperable. Let's cover all the options that gives us all the best use cases that meet our needs. Achieving interoperability in Africa is a creative process, and we've proven it. We are happy to interact with you. The Margins ID, we're powering a new generation of thinking in Africa to suit Africans for utility advancement economically, socially, and politically. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Moses. Okay, so as we are late, okay, so I will ask one question. No? Only one, please. Okay, please. Moses, what has been the experience integrating with banks, financial services companies, and what have been the efficiency gain and impact in the financial industry?
Well, the financial sector is one of the most crucial ones in an African setting. Because in an African setting, most people are unbanked because they're not given the rights to bank, or it's too expensive to bank, or the banks find their accounts not profitable. So by design, our national ID PPP is based on total social and financial inclusion. So in Ghana, as an example, we finance the government to give a card free to everybody. So citizens don't pay for the first card. So once they don't pay, and you have a complete database that includes everybody, and you have all the data fields of everybody, you have their biometrics, both face, fingerprints, iris. And by the Bank of Ghana regulations, the national ID system is integrated into the banking platform, so that whether you're present in a bank, you don't need your card, you can just have a one-to-one biometric verification that brings an eKYC data set straight into your bank. It reduces the cost of customer acquisition, and it builds trust, because your legal identity is correct, it's guaranteed by the state, compliance is automatic. The banks don't have to worry about KYC obligations, because the state and the National Identification Authority have guaranteed that identity. And that's guaranteed in real time with a verification code that's distributed to people in the distributed ledger ecosystem. So today, you can go to any bank portal, you can put your national ID number, and you can open an account on the fly. And you can transfer money between different mobile money providers, from mobile money, from banks, from aggregators, fintechs, wherever you want. So you can see the effect is in the numbers. Between 2019, when we launched, to now, mobile money has gone from $150 billion in Ghana to $450 billion, and growing every day. Trust has been established. Interoperability brings dividends to the banking sector, and everybody has an account.
Thank you very much. And I know that you didn't speak a long time, so I want you to give a final advice.
Well, the journey, on the digital ID road is pretty long, but again, there are so many examples of real success that it's really worth it.
Well, I think that we have to think about design and the legal framework and where we're going to embed an ID system. And we have to give a wide option to the users, increasing their utility before we build the technology. The technology must follow the law.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Donc, on est arrivé à la fin de notre panel. Les échanges aujourd'hui nous ont montré très clairement une chose. Le défi de l'identité numérique à grande échelle n'est pas d'abord un défi technologique, c'est avant tout un défi de gouvernance, un défi de confiance et d'interopérabilité, et de plus en plus un défi de transformation économique. Donc, je pense que les discussions aujourd'hui de ce matin démontrent clairement que notre continent possède désormais l'expertise, les talents et la vision nécessaires pour réussir cette transformation. Et je tiens à remercier chaleureusement mes deux experts, Olivier et Moses. Donc j'espère que vous allez encore les applaudir. Et je vous souhaite encore une bonne fin d'événement. Merci.
Good afternoon. We are set to start the last session of this morning. It's already afternoon. This panel will be having three speakers, Dr. Reda Chenawi, Jay Meyer, and Yakub, who will be addressing the topic about trust and security in digital identity. During this session, we'll try to discuss security foundation of a national digital ID system in an era of cyber threats and AI-driven attacks. Speakers will explore identity resilience, mobile and remote authentication, and how advanced biometric and AI counter fraud while reinforcing trust at the national scale. We will have 1 hour for the discussion, and with no further ado, I'll be inviting to start the presentation.
So, the presentation, please. So, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Mesdames et messieurs, bonjour. First and foremost, I would like to thank ID4Africa for this AGM and for the honor for speaking with you today. Thank you for Mr. and Dr. Cheman, moderator, and thank everyone for attending this session. So, my topic is quite different compared to the previous one, but it's something that should be considered as a foundation for national identity system. So let me start this presentation with a simple question. How safe is your national identity system? This question is becoming central to national sovereignty in 2026 and beyond. The audience should agree the identity is no longer just an administrative function. It's becoming the foundation for public services access. It's becoming the backbone for election, for protection services, and increasingly, it's becoming the key that unlocks the digital economies. So, when identity is compromised, it's no longer an IT issue. It's become societal issue, economical issue, political issue. So, let's screen the agenda. My goal will be very straightforward for this session. What I would like to demonstrate is why cyber risk is now a critical threat to national identity systems and public registries. I will show how this risk could be manageable if we approach it as a strategic program and not only a technology purchase, and show as well a concrete national implementation with secured solution. So, let's start with some figures. This reality we can all agree with. The threat is intensifying, and intensifying globally. First, the volume and sophistication of attacks are accelerating, and this is not marginal. It's exponential increase. And this is not the most important point. What is concerning actually is the shift toward targeted attack against public registries and critical government services. Second, Africa is targeted, and other emerging digital economy as well. And this is not a coincidence. When countries modernize quickly, implementing digital identity, e-passport, online services, they create enormous value, and attackers follow value. The most central is your national identity system because the more attractive is as a target. And the third is the impact. This impact actually it's not only focusing on IT remediation cost. The real costs are on operational disruption that interrupts services served by the citizen. The costs are also political, legal, reputational, but the most actually worrying is that states can lose confidence on the integrity of their records. So let us be clear. Cyber risk is no longer an IT issue. It's a sovereignty and continuity of state issue. So let's explore together the cyber threat landscape for identity systems. When we hear about cyber attack, we often think about one scenario, like ransomware. Actually, the threats are multiple. There is multiple categories that target national identity systems. Let's begin with the first one, phishing attack. Phishing attack remains the primary entry point. A single compromised administrator account could open the door for the entire system. A second one, it's the ransomware. Modern ransomware is not only encryption of file. Modern ransomware is data theft, public extortion, and disruption of services. The third one, insider threats. Whether it is by mistake or by negligence or by malicious, actually these kind of attacks are real and having a great impact on national identity system. Not because people are bad, but actually because the systems are complex. And the privilege you have could open the door for the entire national identity systems. But it has been explained yesterday in the presentation of ICAO and EDIAP. There is the emergent threats. The emergent threats coming with the new technology, like AI. Yesterday, we have shown a kind of attack, presentation attack and morphine attack based on AI. But AI actually is more than that. We are entering an era where AI model could discover and weaponize vulnerabilities in a minute, creating a new class of zero-day vulnerabilities. And finally, the supply chain. When governments build their system, they are not building the systems alone. They rely on vendors, on public libraries, on supply chain, and those could compromise the entire platforms. These threats are not theoretical. They are happening right now, and identity systems are a prime target because the damage can scale nationally. So to protect identity system, we must be honest about how broad the attack surface is. So it has been addressed this morning and yesterday. National identity systems are not on one application. It is an ecosystem, a living ecosystem, that includes citizen-facing application for enrollment, ID verification, and online services, but include as well internal government network and internet perimeter that connect public agencies and service providers. And of course, the backend core, which includes the servers, the database, and the registries. What is concerning, and you can show it on the picture, this brings us to a critical point where many programs fail to secure the entire system because they focus on securing the core systems. But attacks can come from the edge. If we take some example, attacks can come from through social engineering, through a vulnerable endpoint, through an unpatched partner network. So the objective is not to secure only one component. The objective is to secure the entire system. So what does it look like to have a secured solution? A secure identity solution is not a single product. It's a layered defense-in-depth architecture. Within Thales, we believe that a real secured identity solution should have 4 perimeters and area of protection. It starts with governance and people. The best technology will fail without operational discipline. This means clear roles, strict access control, and culture of security. You must secure for sure the endpoint and the application. This means security by design. And we come back to the point of supply chain. You need to have a robust endpoint detection and response and vulnerability management. It means building integrity into enrollment process itself. Protect the network and perimeter. So encryption should be implemented everywhere. You need to put in place a strong firewall, both protection and denial of service mitigation. And crucially, network segmentation to contain any breach and prevent it from spanning. And last but not least, harden the backend systems. This is the crown jewel. It demands multi-factor authentication for all the administration. We must know who is accessing what and why, and at all time. But this is not the last point to secure, actually. If we need to tie all these things together, the most critical capability is continuous monitoring. You need a secure operation center with centralized login, giving you the ability to detect, analyze, and respond in a minute, not a day. This is the difference between secured on paper and a really resilient system. So, this all sounds complex, I must admit. And the natural question from decision maker is, where do we begin? We can start using a structured and well-recognized cybersecurity framework like NIST, CSF. This framework turns security onto governable, measurable, and sustainable national program. It's built on 6 core functions. The first one, govern. You need to establish your policy, risk ownership, and accountability. The second pillar is to identify. Know your assets, know your risks, and your dependency. To protect, implement the layered architecture and control we just discussed. And detect. Ensure you have the visibility to find threats early and recover, restore services, ensure continuity, and learn from events you have faced. This is not just a technical framework. For a nation, it's become a resiliency model. It helps you answer the question that matter at the executive level. What risk are we accepting? Where we are most exposed? How fast can we really respond to a crisis? Do our continuity plan works really? So let us ground this on a real-world example, the Dominican Republic. So the nation embarked on a program to modernize its e-passports and decentralize insurance. These initiatives create huge benefits, but also increases cyber risks. The solution implemented by Thales and its partners combined biometric enrollment and modern e-passport issuance, but critically with advanced 24/7 cybersecurity monitoring and response services. Those services were based on the state-of-the-art and next-generation technology and CM, using AI to defend, not only the capability that AI could have on offensive segment, but also for defense. And most the threats known on the national identity system are fed to the CM that correlate the event and given the capacity to react immediately. So if we need to summarize, national identity systems are now primary strategic targets. The risk is no longer confined to IT. It's a direct risk to your sovereignty, your continuity, and public trust. But the good news is that the risk is manageable. It's manageable if we approach it as a strategic program, if we implement this layered architecture that protects the systems. If you are making decisions about national identity system or modernization of your national identity system, you should consider cybersecurity as a strategic enabler, not only a constraint. Because when you build security into the foundation of your identity system, you are not just preventing risk. You are building national trust. You are enabling future growth, and you are securing the digital promise for your nation and your citizens. So thank you very much for having attended to this presentation. I look forward to your question, and if you have a practical discussion you would like to have, please join us on both M21 to have this kind of discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, for the presentation, for keeping on the time. We'll be having the question after the presentation of the other members of the panel. Now I have the privilege of inviting James Mayer to present on digitally signed biometric barcodes binding humans to credential in national ID, immigration, asylum seeking, and service provision. Please, 15 minutes for the presentation.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
We can get our slide deck going here. Hello, everybody. My name is Jay Meyer, and I'm with a company called FaceTech. FaceTech is the leading global provider of 3D face liveness software and biometric matching software. We're an OEM vendor, and IDV vendors around the world, governments around the world use our technology to determine if it is a living human being trying to gain access, and whether or not it is the correct living human being gathering access. You know, we hear a lot of scary stories when people like me get up on a stage. So I'd like to just cut to the chase. You know, is there anybody in the room that didn't know that identity data has been stolen and is available for sale on the dark web? I don't see people raising their hand. Is there anybody in the room that didn't know that criminals buy that identity data so that they can misrepresent themselves and gain access to privileges? They make fake identity documents, and then they say they are somebody they are not, so that they can get access to accounts, to services, to assets, right? I think everybody knows that this is happening. So I want to just take a second and talk about what makes identity data trustworthy, okay? We know that the identity data that comes from a trusted source is the most trusted. When the government, I like to say you are who the government says you are. In the United States, where I'm from, if I want to change my name, I literally have to ask the government permission to do that. And when I apply for a mortgage or do something, access government services, they want to know my legal identity, not my Facebook identity or other social media. So a known and trusted source is critically important. The data in that, where that data is held, has to include fixed identity data and biometric data. The picture that is on your driver's license or your passport or your national ID card or your health ID card, the picture is effectively a biometric. And what that does is it binds the physical human being to the verified identity that is written out on the credential itself. And it is the binding that is most important there. We can trust the identity data. We can trust that this face represents the person the identity data describes, but what we haven't done effectively out in the field is bind that physical human being to that credential. The picture on the credential is not good enough. The human beings are not good at looking at a picture, and the face matching systems that are out there are frequently not bound to identity data at all. So if you have bound identity data to the appropriate biometric data, you have to make sure that that can't be changed. For example, in an iPhone and in virtually all cellular phones today, they use biometrics. And they say, oh, that's good enough. We have Face ID, we have Touch ID, we have whatever Samsung uses. And we think, okay, they are confirming that I am who I say I am. But the problem is that the biometric data that is in that phone is not associated with any identity data anywhere. It is simply anonymous biometric data, and it can be changed with a PIN. And what that means is that if I get control of your phone and I have your PIN, I can put my biometric data in that phone, and then the phone will tell anybody else that I am you. And that is what's happening out in the field, folks. Now, we normally look at a driver's license and we say, yeah, the face is, you know, J. This has got to be J. And we normally would be able to trust this document because it looks like it came from a government source. But they are being faked. In the United States, the Department of Homeland Security intercepts millions of fake credentials every year. Passports, passport cards, driver's licenses, all kinds of different identity cards. And they're made on the same machines that the states or the governments use to make those documents in the first place. They are exact replicas. But because I can buy your identity data online, I can have a Chinese company or an Eastern European company, that's where they are largely located, make a fake driver's license with your identity data on it and my picture. And from that point forward, I am you. The IDV vendors that are out there that do background checks, if I upload that fake credential, the IDV vendor will tell everybody that I am effectively you because it has the wrong picture. And this, with Gen AI, it's even worse. You know, we can make fake credentials online, and so many of these systems require us to send a photo of the credential up into their cloud, where they say they try and analyze it. The fact is that no one is able to analyze a credential effectively. The Department of Homeland Security in the United States has done a lot of testing on this. Document authentication systems don't work. And that's especially true with AI. This is actually an old driver's license of mine. I changed some of the information on it. I put a different picture on it. But that's my driver's license with someone else's identity data and photograph. And if that guy uploaded that document into a system, he would be me from that point forward. The systems can't tell the difference. And here's the thing. If you analyze cybersecurity attacks, breaches, identity thefts, various frauds, you analyze them all, what we find is that between 65 and 85% of these attacks are perpetrated through the transfer of a valid credential to somebody who is not authorized to use it. That applies to physical credentials and digital credentials. So if I have your document, I might try and get privileges that you are entitled to. That's the way these frauds work. A password is a perfect example. Again, remember, it represents an identity. We somehow trust the source, and it's supposed to be bound to an individual human being because presumably that one person is the only person that can remember the password. But we know passwords don't work that well because anybody can use your password. So I got this from the Verizon Enterprise Security Report from last year, and you can see the trends in these different types of attacks. The thing is that they are all credential transfer attacks. Depending on who measures it, 65 to 85% of these attacks have to do with that exact vector. And we can now say that the bad guys are not hacking their way in, they are logging in using your credentials. And this is a critical component. It's kind of messy, so I'm just going to spend a minute on it. We know that cryptography works very well, and we call it deterministic. If the credential is authenticated with an X509 certificate or some type of token, we can say with a high degree, 100% confidence, that that is legitimate or it is not. The certificate is there, it is not. That is called deterministic. But people cannot be deterministically identified. There is always a chance that it is not the right person. Even when they're logging on their phone, even when they're trying to access services, government services or corporate services or whatever, employees trying to log on to the corporate network, we can't ever know for sure that this person is, in fact, who they say they are. So an identity management system cannot it cannot provide deterministic outcomes because there is always a component that is probabilistic, the human component, because we are out here in the real world. The device can be moved. You could have my device. You could use my laptop. So we have to understand that the best we can do is try to improve the probabilistic outcome to as high as perfect as possible, but understanding that it can never be perfect. We can be overconfident in our systems. And going back to this chart, oh boy, I'm already running out of time. Going back to this chart, the issue is the binding, right? That's the problem. So we have two problems. We can't trust the data, and we can't trust that we know who is controlling trusted data. And so we have to think about how to solve that. We have two basic architectures that can solve that. We can take biometric data from an individual and bind it to their verified identity behind the firewall. And then when that individual wants to access privileges, they can resubmit a new biometric file and match it against the one that's bound to that profile. And if they match, you know it's that person. But here's the problem. A lot of people don't like transferring biometric data over the internet. They don't like storing biometric data in their database. It scares them. And I understand that. I'm not going to argue that point. So, but it's that data in the database that's important. It's the verified identity data and the face data bound together. Well, what if we could take that, a mirror image of it, and put it in the hands of the individual it describes? A national ID or something like that. Well, I'm going to move through here. This is a schematic of moving the data behind the firewall. But if we take that relationship data and we put it in the hands of the citizen, we have to be able to secure it because it can't be separated. It has to be immutable, remember? And so now there are these technologies out there called digitally signed biometric barcodes, QR codes. And there's a handful of companies that do something like this. We're the only ones that have an actual QR code that does this. And what we did is take the source data from behind the firewall, the trusted identity data and the biometric data, and we encoded it into a standardized QR code that can, and then we have enough space to digitally sign the QR code so we know it can't be adulterated. We know who issued it, the government of some country. The agency that provides the health services could issue this. And what this means is that you don't have to store that biometric data in your database, and you don't have to move biometric data around. It means that the citizen controls their own biometric data that's bound to their identity data, and they can present it to anybody they want. And it has the same identity verification strength if you were querying the database itself, because it is cryptographically secured with a digital signature. So imagine if you put that on a credential, 2 minutes. Imagine if you put that on a passport or a visa document, and it doesn't matter if it's digital or physical. Verifiable credentials have the same vulnerabilities. We don't know who's in control of them. But if this was attached to a verifiable credential, you could scan that QR code and then compare that person's face to the biometric data that's stored in the code. And if it matches, you know it's the right person. If it doesn't, it means the wrong person is trying to use that credential. Does that make sense? So this works digitally, it works offline, it works physically, and it works online. We have an app that allows you to access the data in these codes without having internet access at all. And that means this is ideal for border crossing. It's ideal for any place where you don't have internet connectivity. And so we think that digitally signed biometric barcodes are the next phase of expansion with digital identity globally. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jay, for this presentation, for keeping the time. Now, Jakub, it's your turn. 15 minutes for presentation, then we'll have 5 minutes to debate. Thank you.
Okay, let's wait for the right presentation, but meanwhile...
You can leave my face up there as long as you want. Yeah, I know.
Meanwhile, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you for having me today. I'm bringing another side of the story that gentlemen ahead of me presented about, and my message today is clear. AI is now shaping both sides of identity security. It is no longer a question if AI is present in authentication, because we know it already is, but the real challenge is whether governments and service providers can build trust architecture that is stronger than the fraud networks attacking it. And to make that case, actually, we're going to move through 4 steps. The first one, how AI is changing the threat landscape. The second one, what a high assurance remote authentication architecture looks like. Third one, how the Polish model applies the architecture in practice. And finally, what governments should require if they want to build trust at scale. As we have heard, trusted remote authentication is now a national priority. It sits right at the intersection of compliance, fraud control, age assurance, paperless service delivery, remote sales, and data protection. When we look at the AI versus AI, let me start with the dual impact of AI on identity and security. AI is part of the defense, right? It strengthens liveness, presentation attack detection. It also improves document authenticity checks. It supports biometric risk scoring. It helps to detect anomalies that manual review may miss. But it also enables a faster and more coordinated fraud response. The key point is that AI creates the most value when it's embedded in a layered trust model. It should be tied to trusted evidence, not used as a standalone control. Yet, at the same time, attackers are using AI to industrialize fraud. As we have heard, deepfakes, account takeovers, synthetic identities, document image fabrication, personalized phishing, they are just becoming so much easier to produce. They are also becoming cheaper to scale and harder to detect with manual controls alone. That is why identity security is now this AI versus AI contest. The winning side will be the one with better evidence, better orchestration, and stronger operational discipline. When we look at the threat landscape, it's without a doubt an underlying problem that old signals of trust are breaking down. Our senses pretty much can no longer be treated as a reliable verification method. Online personal data cannot be accepted as trustworthy without authoritative verification. The broader shift is from isolated manual fraud to AI-scaled fraud. The attack surface now spans forged EIDs and passport documents, fabricated documents and face images, challenges in reliable facial matching, account takeovers, stolen credentials, broader cybersecurity-enabled impersonation. What matters here is the fact that these attacks can be repeated at volume and move across channels. And this is really problematic because this drives real costs for the government, service providers, and the wider economy. Now, let's think about identity and how it becomes the fraud target. The most frequently forged docs are national IDs, followed by driver's licenses and passports. Why? Do we have an answer? In the interest of time, I'll just give it out to you right now, because these documents carry the biggest impact and allow best access to individuals' finance. And the key point is, core identity documents are still at the center of the battle. The strongest focus on national IDs, which basically tells us that foundational credentials remain the most valuable targets for fraudsters. And what it also means is that once a criminal can misuse a trusted credential, then they can unlock many downstream services. And secure issuance remains essential, yet secure remote use is now just as important. Fraudsters aim to break security around the core identification documents, not only in a physical form, but also as EIDs or broader e-identity. Here, deepfakes are one of the key fraudulent methods, leveraging AI to generate a false confirmation of the individual's identity online. And deepfakes are no longer a future risk, right? They are an active fraud channel. The slide shows that they are especially concentrated in higher risk financial services. And the methods are broad. Synthetic identities, face swaps, animated selfies, they are all being used in real fraud attempts. The practical lesson here is that organizations can no longer rely on visual inspection or basic selfie check. They need stronger liveness, stronger session controls, and continuous fraud monitoring around the identity event. And strong and trusted methods shouldn't be perceived as a simple one-element solution. Nowadays, with growing role of e-identity, AI and electronic identity confirmation methods, the authentication has to be treated as an architecture, combining pretty much both the document with the mobile app or e-document, and service provider. The key point is that trust does not come from one control. It comes from linking all these layers in one accountable system. So what does this model look like? It starts with a trusted identity source, ideally a government-issued document with a chip. Layer 2 is document authenticity check, chip readout, cryptographic validation, document validity check. Layer 3 is person-to-document binding, and we can achieve that through face match, biometric verification, and liveness. Layer 4 is device and session trust. And layer 5, at the end, risk and operations, monitoring, exceptions, recovery, and audit trail. And as we just saw, the trust architecture links all the core elements: ID, identification method based on AI, and the actual individual. And this slide shows the core binding step. The strongest model is not self-declared data and the selfie. It's actually an authoritative document combined with real-time bonding and biometric verification of the presenter. When the identity data comes from the chip and the person in front of the camera is verified against it, you create a much stronger connection between a trusted credential and a real human being. That is the basis for reliable remote authentication in high assurance use cases. And now the Polish model, right? Let's demonstrate how it works operationally. The user connects to a service, selects login with eID, then he or she scans a QR code to open a secure mobile session, reads the eID through NFC, and then confirms the identity with biometrics or PIN number. At that point, identity can be confirmed or denied, rejected, right? And the service can grant access or activate the account. What matters here is that the process is both high assurance and practical. It uses a trusted chip-based credential and a device that pretty much every citizen already has. And the most important part, actually, in this process is that scalable adoption requires security that feels simple for the user. Strong biometric verification can still be citizen-friendly. 3D liveness helps prevent presentation attacks. AI matching improves confidence in the face match. And the user experience remains simple, a guided selfie with face zoom. In public sector and regulated use cases, the balance matters because adoption falls quickly if the process feels fragile, confusing, or overly burdensome. Once this layer is in place, it can support real services, that being e-government services, elections, signing utility contracts, getting prescriptions, going through bank onboarding, going through video call identification or age verification. The value here is not the biometric check by itself. The value is secure service delivery. And taking into account all the elements mentioned before, I believe there are 5 key elements that have to work together, not only from the technical, but even more important so, from governance perspective. And from a policy standpoint, governments should require 5 things. First, for sure, assurance, a trusted identity source and strong biometric binding. Second, security, PAD, anti-spoofing, resistant to account takeovers. Third, governance, auditability, exception handling, and clear accountability. Fourth, compliance, privacy, lawful processing, sector rules such as KYC or AML. And the fifth one, inclusion, which is almost the most important. The system must be usable, scalable, accessible. And the key message is that trust is not a technical outcome, it is a governance outcome. Let me close the presentation with a slide about PWPW, which I'm representing. If you would like to continue this discussion, I will be at booth R44, and I will welcome any sort of questions or thoughts, discussions at the booth. And if there is one clear message that I want you to remember after this presentation, it's that in the AI era, trusted remote authentication starts with authoritative identity evidence, binds it to a real person, and surrounds that process with governance. Thank you.
Thank you, Jakob, for keeping the time. We are running late in this conference this morning, but we have some 5 minutes to dialogue and elaborate a bit more on the aspects that you all covered during the presentation. I'll start my questions addressing the first one to Rida. Rida, during your presentation, you made reference to legal aspects, but mainly to the EU on NIS2 and also eIDAS. How would African governments learn from that experience and make sure that they do implement legal and regulatory framework, not only for IDE, but addressing the issue that we're discussing here of trust and security? Would cybersecurity laws add to the equation and in improving the security of the ID system?
Thank you for the question. I have in fact referred to NIST2, which is a cybersecurity framework by the National Institute of Technology from the US, which is actually a framework that will structure your governance for the cybersecurity. It was an example because I believe that it's a real foundation to secure the system with these 6 pillars we have presented. I have presented the govern, identify, protect, and recover. All those things helps government to start from one point. Where do we start? The question I have shared. So where do we begin? And for me, I believe that we need to use this kind of framework. But there is another framework actually, or standards like ISO, and this is it concerns specifically the cybersecurity. Coming to digital identity, you have the framework and certification like what you mentioned, IDAS. It will secure a part of the exchanges, the data exchanges. The NIS2 will have a holistic view of cybersecurity. As I explained, actually, what we need to do is not to secure the core solution, but to secure the ecosystem. And the ecosystem, you have networks, you have partners, supply chain, you have many things. So this framework will help to build a robust and good, solid foundation for your cybersecurity, while IDAS is concerning the digital identity itself.
Thank you for this elaboration. Jay, in your presentation, you shared the development in terms of moving elements of cybersecurity to the device, to the citizen.
Yep.
But I want to use the question that's here at Slido. One of the questions said, as digital ID becomes the gateway to essential service, what major security risks are governments still underestimating? And to add to this question, taking the discussion yesterday on cloud and also on the role of that has been mentioned this morning, that ID should be a framework and infrastructure for the entire digital transformation within the context of service being provided across jurisdiction. How can we implement or advise African government to implement cybersecurity solution that will address within this complex international context?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think, you know, when we're talking about interoperability across jurisdictions, right? You need to have some standardized components. The ICAO 9303 is a perfect example of that for passports. They also have standards for non-passport identity documents. We also have digital identity documents, verifiable credentials. There's some things out there called self-sovereign credentials, which are a little bit, they're a little bit confusing. And of course, we have mobile driver's license. The standard for ISO 18013-5 is most current. There is a critical element of this, of being able to enhance the free trade and free travel and the economic advantages of traveling between geographies and jurisdictions. There needs to be core elements of these documents that are readable by anybody. That's the whole point of standardization, right? Not everything has to be standardized, but there has to be core elements that everyone agrees on. And it's interesting because we had the same question at a MOSIP-related event a few months ago, and we talked about the possibility of creating a document, because we have a lot of documents out there that are not built to change, to harmonize with other documents today. And so in the MOSIP ecosystem, they continue to bump into that problem. So there could be a malleable and changeable framework of primary identity-related components that are required. And if the surrounding countries, if you know, it would be a treaty negotiation potentially, they would agree to those standard components. At least they had a minimum amount of information about this person that's crossing over, right? And that's a start. This is an attrition process, however. It's going to take a very, very long time to really find complete interoperability.
Thank you, Jay. Jacob, on your last slide, you made reference to an important aspect, that cybersecurity is not only a technological problem or operational problem, it's also social. And you made reference to a number of steps in order to secure assurance. Yesterday, we were discussing the debate between government entities. There are agencies responsible for identity. There are agencies responsible for data protection. There are authorities responsible for cybersecurity. And the topic of your presentation is AI versus AI. If we can discuss which is the government agency that will take responsibility of cybersecurity in the context of AI. Do we need another new AI cybersecurity agency or distributed across the sectoral regulators that will be part of the digital ecosystem within a specific jurisdiction?
Sure, that's a great question, and I don't believe there should be a separate entity just to govern AI, since it's basically a part of cybersecurity of digital services that the country is offering. Of course, it varies country by country. In some countries, you have specific ministries that are devoted to bringing digital services to their citizens. In others, it's part of the Ministry of Interior. So basically, the unit should be placed in the same entity in which this digital services agenda is being pursued by the government. And I would say the most important is to work together across the ecosystem, right? It can't be a single, I would say, front-end solution. It has to be rooted like in the entire digital services process.
Thank you, Jakob. This is an interesting topic. We could stay here for another hour in debating, but we're running late and we do have lunch now. We'll end now this debate, but the speakers are available to continue the debate and in their booths, as they mentioned after the presentation. With this, I would ask the organizers to follow with the announcement after the session. And thank you all for contributing to this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Nice work.